Hello everyone, in last video I gave you the information about cardiac cycle and I told you that I will show you an animation. So now let us look onto the animation and try to understand the cardiac cycle better. So see, this is your lungs, this is where your heart is located, right? And now this is your right atrium, okay? This is your right ventricle, and deoxygenated blood from the body, that means this is your superior vena cava and this is your inferior vena cava, comes into this right atrium, right? Okay. Now see, this is the superior vena cava, this is the inferior vena cava, okay? Now this is your right ventricle. See how what happened is, यहाँ पे this is showing, blue is showing the deoxygenated blood and red is showing the oxygenated blood. So here it was shown that blood is here in the right atrium, deoxygenated blood is being received by this right atrium from superior and inferior vena cava, and now this is being pushed into the right ventricle. Okay, now this is being pushed into the right ventricle. See, now the right ventricle has got the blood from this right atrium, and here what happened is this tricuspid valve opened, right? What happened is how the blood from the right atrium came into right ventricle. See how the tricuspid valve opened, है ना? Please appreciate it. ठीक है? See, now the tricuspid valve opened and all the blood from the right atrium rushed into the right ventricle. Okay, this is what we talked about the cardiac cycle, and please I also want you to appreciate that how both the sides of heart are working simultaneously. When this tricuspid valve opens and closes, this bicuspid valve also opens and closes. Okay, please appreciate the same. Okay, see. So now this is your pulmonary valve. Now what happened is, see, okay, so this, now what will happen, now once all the blood is has been received by the ventricle, what will happen, now this blood will be pushed into the aorta and your pulmonary artery, right? So for that what needs to be happened, for that your pulmonary valve and your aortic valve needs to be opened, so that when ventricles contract, the blood moves into the aorta and the pulmonary vein. So see, right? So now the ventricle, what is happening, now the ventricle will contract. See, right, both the ventricles, these contracted, and what opened, see, the pulmonary valve here opened, right? And this is the pulmonary artery, and this will lead to all the deoxygenated blood from the right side of the heart will go to the lungs. Okay, and when it went to the lungs, now all the blood, right, now all the blood which has been purified by the lungs will now be received by your left atrium. So see, here is what red is depicting your oxygenated blood and blue is depicting your deoxygenated blood. Are you appreciating that when your left ventricles filled with oxygenated blood, your right ventricles also filled with deoxygenated blood? This was also true when I was explaining you on the function of when I was explaining you the function of right side, right? So please appreciate that. Okay, so now this is the left atrium and oxygenated blood came here. These are the pulmonary veins through which the oxygenated blood came into the right atrium. Okay, now see, for moving the blood into the left ventricle, this bicuspid valve opened, and along with the opening of bicuspid valve, the tricuspid valves also opened, right? And because of the opening of bicuspid and tricuspid valve, all the blood from the atrium came to the ventricle, right? Now the atria will contract, which is called as atrial systole, and the ventricles, for receiving blood, they will relax, which is called as atrial diastole. And now again the ventricles will contract, which is called as atrial systole, and it will again push the blood into the arteries. See, right? So this is the mitral valve or bicuspid valve, and this is the left ventricle. Now these ventricles will contract. See, these ventricles Now they contracted, right? And when they contracted, this is aorta, right? Aorta has not been shown here. Just imagine that aorta is, going to the whole body through here, and this is what is shown is your aortic valve. So for pushing the blood into the aorta, what will need to open? This aortic valve, this needs to open, right? There is also the opening of pulmonary valve. I told you that right side and left side of the heart will always function together, right? For for the purpose of explanation, this has been shown separately, but when you will see the video nicely, you will see and you will appreciate that both the sides are working together. Okay, so now this aortic valve push the blood into aorta, and simultaneously see these tricuspid and bicuspid valves also closed. Why? So that the blood, when these ventricles are pushing blood, so that there is no backflow of blood into the ventricle. I will replay the video for you to appreciate. Please appreciate the opening of pulmonary and aortic valve, and please appreciate the closure of your tricuspid and bicuspid valves. Okay, see. So now these are the pulmonary veins. Now see, this opened and the ventricles filled. Now when the ventricles will start to contract, this will close, this tricuspid and bicuspid valve will close, and the pulmonary valves will now open. Pulmonary and aortic valves will open, so that the blood is pushed into the aorta and the pulmonary vein. I hope you appreciate it. This is a very beautiful video. Okay, and now whole of the cycle repeats. So let us see once again how this works, right? So see, first, what is this image? This is, let us assume that this is the joint diastole. I started the explanation of cardiac cycle from joint diastole, right? So in this joint diastole, what is happening? Your atria are relaxing, ventricles are relaxing, and this tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve both are open, so that the blood, whatever blood which is coming from inferior and superior vena cava and the pulmonary veins are draining into right and left atrium respectively, and the blood from the atrium is going into ventricle, and the blood from left atrium is going into left ventricle, right? So now what will happen after the phase of joint diastole? There is atrial systole, sinoatrial node will discharge it will send a signal for the atrium to contract, and that signal will take 0.1 second to reach the ventricles. That is when the ventricles will contract, and at that time your atria will relax, right? So let us look forward, right? So see, all the blood now goes into the ventricle, and now the atria contracted, right? When the atria contracted, or now this is 1 second after, see, and right now all the blood went to the ventricle and atria contracted. This is what is called as atrial systole. Okay, now when atrial systole will end, your ventricular systole will start, and when ventricular systole will start, ventricles will start contracting. So when ventricles will start contracting, to prevent blood will try to go again back into the atrium. So to prevent this tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve, these will close. See, right? So atria contracted and all the blood is pushed into ventricles, and see, now the ventricles are starting to contract. This is such a beautiful video. When the ventricles are starting to contract, these tricuspid and this bicuspid valve, they close, and because of closure, and now because what will happen, because these valves are closed and the ventricles is contracting, now the pressure of the heart is increasing, pressure of the ventricles of the heart is increasing, and because of the increasing pressure, this is your pulmonary valve and this is your aortic valve. These will open, so that now the ventricles can push the blood into the aorta and the pulmonary vein. See, right? So see, these open, and the blood is again pushed into the aorta and the pulmonary vein and aorta, right? This is your aorta and this is your pulmonary vein, and as soon as it pushed, right, what will happen? Now the ventricles, after 0.3 seconds, they will start to relax, and before that atria also starts to relax. So see, because of when ventricles contracted, atria relaxed, and because of relaxation of atria, what happened? Again the blood started filling these two atria, right? Now when the ventricles will now relax, all the blood from atria will again come back into ventricles. See, so please appreciate it. Now the atria is completely full, atria contracted as a whole, and the blood is pushed, right? So थोड़ा सा वापस देख लेते हैं. right? So we saw it earlier. Now see, okay, there was filling of atria, now it went to ventricle, right? There is opening of tricuspid and bicuspid valve, closure of tricuspid and bicuspid valve, contraction of ventricles, opening of pulmonary and aortic valves, all the blood pushed into aorta and pulmonary veins, atria relaxing, all the bloods collecting into atria, and finally the ventricles will relax and your atria will contract and all the blood will be again rushed back into the ventricles. So that was about your cardiac cycle. I hope you understood it, and now let us move on to the cardiac cycle and look on to the various durations of cardiac cycle, right? So let's start. So first there was this is what is called as from 0.4 second, राइट आप ध्यान से समझना. सो नाउ दिस इज द डायग्राम ऑफ अ कार्डियक साइकिल. एंड अगर स्कूल में आपको कार्डियक साइकिल बनाने आता है आप ये डायग्राम ज़रूर बनाएंगे, ठीक है. सो हाउ विल यू ड्रॉ दिस डायग्राम? ड्रॉ 3 सर्कल्स and divide that circle into 8 equal parts and start 0.8 second यहाँ लिख करके you will divide it into 8 parts, right? Now from here 0.4 second to 0.8 second, this phase, please mark it here, this phase is what is called as joint this phase is what is called as joint diastole. Joint diastole. And why joint diastole? Because see, from 0.4 second to 0.8 second both your atria and ventricles are in diastole, ठीक है. Now once the cardiac cycle start, what happens? First the SA node sends a, you can also now when I am dictating the sentences along with this, you can have your copy and pen at your hand and you can write down the various steps of cardiac cycle in the form of a flowchart, okay. So now what will first happen? SA node will discharge a potential, it will discharge a potential and it will lead to atrial systole, right? So for 0.1 second first there is atrial systole. Now after 0.1 second, now what will happen? Give an arrow and write down that now the signal of contraction has reached the AV node and ventricles for, and now the signal of contraction has reached the ventricles via AV node, ठीक है. So now because this has reached AV node, now please give the arrow and write now the ventricles will contract. Now the ventricles will contract. This is what is called as ventricular systole. ठीक है, this is what is called as ventricular systole. It lasts for 0.3 seconds, ठीक है. It lasts for 0.3 seconds after the atrial systole, after the atrial systole, right? And atrial systole was for 0.1 second, after which the atria relaxes. So what is the time duration of atrial diastole? Whole cardiac cycle is for 0.8 seconds, right? And the atrial systole lasts for 1 second. So what will be the duration of atrial diastole? That will be 0.7 seconds, right? And after 0.1 second your ventricular systole starts. So what will be the duration of ventricular systole? That will be 0.3 seconds. So what will be the duration of ventricular diastole? The duration of ventricular diastole is 0.5 second. And I hope there is no problem in this. And if someone asks you what is the duration of joint diastole, so joint diastole is from 0.4 to 0.8 seconds. So the duration of joint diastole is 0.4 second. And these are some potential MCQs. I hope you understood all the time divisions of this. Now please write down what will happen. First in atrials, first there is joint diastole. In joint diastole, blood from superior and inferior vena cava are filling the atrium and the tricuspid and bicuspid valve are open and the blood from right and left ventricles, right and left atrium are filling the right and left ventricles, ठीक है. After that please write down, give an arrow, atrial systole starts and this increases the ventricular filling, this increases the ventricular filling by 30%. This is the figure of your NCERT. Now there is atrial systole which leads to increase of 30%, increase by 30% in ventricular filling. Please give an arrow. Now the atria relax or atria come in diastole and ventricular systole starts, ठीक है. Now the atria relax and ventricular systole starts. Because of starting of ventricular systole, there is closure of tricuspid and bicuspid valves. Because of starting of ventricular systole, there is closure of tricuspid and bicuspid valve to prevent the backflow of blood from the ventricles into the atria, right? From the ventricles into the atria. I will open this image for you so that you can understand better. Okay. Arrow देके लिखो. Also there is opening of aortic and pulmonary valve. Also there is opening of aortic and pulmonary valve so that contraction of ventricles lead to flow of blood through the aorta and pulmonary artery, right? After that, after 0.3 seconds, the ventricles, give an arrow, after 0.3 seconds there is ventricular diastole, the ventricles relax. ठीक है, फिर arrow देके लिखो, blood tries to flow back from aorta and pulmonary artery into the ventricles. ठीक है, to prevent this there is closure of pulmonary and aortic valve. ठीक है, and ठीक है, फिर फ्लो चार्ट देख के लिखो, दिस टाइम व्हेन द वेंट्रिकल रिलैक्सेस और व्हेन द वेंट्रिकल डायस्टोल स्टार्ट्स. ठीक है, दिस इज व्हाट इज कॉल्ड एज जॉइंट डायस्टोल एंड द साइकिल रिपीट्स अगेन. दिस इज व्हाट इज कॉल्ड एज जॉइंट डायस्टोल एंड द साइकिल रिपीट्स itself. I hope you don't have any problem with cardiac cycle. I tried to explain it as nicely as possible, as slowly as possible. If you have any doubts, you can personally message me on WhatsApp. Okay, now let us move forward and look into one very emerging thing, that is what is called as ECG or electrocardiograph. Now remember children that there are two words, ECG. ECG stands for electrocardiograph. ठीक है, एंड इट्स नॉट ग्राम. नाउ यू विल आस्क मैम इलेक्ट्रोकार्डियोग्राम क्या होता है? सो इलेक्ट्रोकार्डियोग्राम इज द मशीन विच रिकॉर्ड्स इलेक्ट्रोकार्डियोग्राफ, राइट? ECG is a graph. You must have seen ECGs in movies, and there is a machine behind the bed of the if a patient is admitted in the hospital, there is a machine which is continuously beeping and it is making some shapes like this. You must have seen this in movies, or you must have had a paper which is what is called as ECG. If you must have, if you are having grandparents who must have underwent this process. So this is what is called ECG or electrocardiograph. Now what does this do? What does this mean? Electro means because of electric waves, with the help of electric waves we are recording the various phases of cardiac cycle on a graph, right? Because of, what did I say? Because of electricity, with the help of electricity we are recording various phases of cardiac cycle on a graph. This is what is called as electrocardiograph. ठीक है, and what is that machine which is recording this? This is what is electrocardiogram. ठीक है, now look into this. There are 3 leads, है ना? Leads की मदद से नापते हैं. You must have seen various metal leads placed on various places of our chest, wrist, legs, and that is how ECG is recorded. So there may be many leads, but there are only 3 primary leads. What are those? You have to remember 3. These are placed on right wrist, left wrist and left ankle. Again left में क्यों place करते हैं? Because heart is located on the left side, right? So उससे याद रखना, left leg, left wrist and right hand, so that there is a triangle formed by this. There is an electric triangle formed by this, and this is how the electric potentials of heart, the contraction and relaxations, the signals generated by SA node is recorded in this graph. ठीक है, so where are the 3 leads placed? This is a very important question. It is placed on right wrist, left wrist and left ankle. I hope this is clear. Now let us look on to the graph. ठीक है, so now there are various names, है ना? P, Q, R, S and T. ठीक है, so first there is what is called as the P wave. This is what is called as the P wave. ठीक है, this is called as QRS complex, and this is your T wave. ठीक है, this is your T wave. Now what is P wave? Why is P wave generated? P wave depicts your atrial depolarization. Atrial depolarization. Now the meaning of polarization and depolarization you will understand better when I start your nervous system, but for now understand that whenever your SA node is generating an electric impulse, your electric signal, so that atria and ventricle contract, that is what is called as depolarization. Okay, and that depolarization, that will correspond to the systole of heart, because whenever the signal will be generated, your heart will contract, and whenever the signal will not be generated, your heart will relax. That is the phase of diastole, and that is when we will say that that is polarization. Okay, so depolarization means contraction or systole of heart for now, right? Nervous system, you will understand it better. And depolarization means relaxation or diastole of heart. Okay, or diastole of heart. So see, okay. Okay, so first what will happen? First there is atrial depolarization or atrial systole, you know that. So P wave stands for atrial systole. Now next there was ventricular systole. Now at the time when I was making you write the different phases of cardiac cycle, I told you that ventricular systole corresponds with atrial diastole. When the ventricles will contract, at the same time atria will start relaxing. So this QRS complex, this is mainly because of ventricular systole, right? Ventricular depolarization, ventricular depolarization, but there is also atrial repolarization in this, right? What do you mean by repolarization? That means relaxation, but this atrial repolarization is masked by this ventricular depolarization, and that is why we do not get a separate wave for atrial repolarization. Okay, so this corresponds to your ventricular depolarization, and which masks atrial repolarization. Okay, it masks atrial repolarization. Okay, and this last wave, this T wave, now after ventricular depolarization, after ventricular systole, what will happen? There will be ventricular repolarization, or there will be ventricular diastole. So this T wave, this corresponds to your ventricular repolarization, है ना? What do you mean by repolarization? Repolarization means diastole. ठीक है, ventricular repolarization. ठीक है, तो आप पूछोगे मैम atrial repolarization कहाँ गया? तो you have to understand that atrial repolarization is masked by QRS complex, which represents the ventricular depolarization. Why? Because ventricular depolarization and atrial repolarization, that is ventricular systole and atrial diastole, happens at the same time. ठीक है, so this was about ECG. है ना? तो whenever there will be some dysfunction of your heart, so the time duration of atrial depolarization, ventricular depolarization, repolarization, that will change, and it will lead to change in this graph, which will make your physician, your doctor, understand that yes, there is some abnormality going on with your heart. So this ECG, this is very important. One more question, प्लीज़ एक चीज़ याद रखना, दैट दिस ECG, दिस इज रिकॉर्डेड इन अ ग्राफ पेपर. ठीक है, दिस ECG इज रिकॉर्डेड इन अ ग्राफ पेपर, एंड वन स्मॉल बॉक्स, इट कॉरेस्पॉन्ड्स टू 1 millimeter. ठीक है, एक स्मॉल बॉक्स का लेंथ कितना होता है? दैट इज 1 millimeter, एंड दिस 1 millimeter इज कॉरेस्पॉन्डिंग टू 0.04 seconds, राइट? दिस is corresponding to 0.04 seconds. Okay, more details we'll talk about in the next video.